Authority. I'm your host, Alastair McDermott, and I'm delighted to say that today my guest is Mindi Zissman. Mindi is somebody who I know from one of my other friends and the person who wrote the foreword for my book, Rochelle Moulton. And Mindi was on her podcast. I thought it was a great interview, and I thought that it would be a really great topic to talk to you about. Mindi, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Alastair. I'm so glad to be here.
Well, you are a ghostwriter, a B2B content strategist. I'm really interested in what you're going to talk about those topics, because that's what we're going to get into today. But I'm also interested in just kind of setting the scene with revenue, because I know that for this year as a goal, you were talking about, when I say for this year, for the next 12 months, you're looking to build your business to $1 million in revenue. Is that right?
That's the plan. Hope I get
Now,
there.
what I think is interesting is that you're not growing a massive business in terms of headcount. And can you tell me a little bit more about how you think about hiring people and headcount? Because I know some people here listening to this or watching this don't want to grow a big business in terms of having lots of employees.
Sure, that's a good question. So I'll tell you, this was definitely a trial and error thing in my business. I definitely, as I said, we talked about earlier that I definitely hit by myself as a freelancer, like kind of a revenue threshold. I was at about like 120 to 150, and I just couldn't get past that. And to me, I thought, oh, I have to just hire people. I think that we're trained. I don't know if this is a European thing, but certainly is an American thing, that to grow means to just add people, add headcount. And I did that, and it didn't do that for me. I ended up hiring two people. They left me within 6 months. Wasn't a good fit for them. Wasn't a good fit for me. It ended up being just a tremendous amount of like headache in terms of actually just having to train and bring the people up to speed and manage them. And that was a lot harder than I had anticipated. And I think that that's the case with a lot of freelancers. We all kind of have worked for ourselves for a long time. I'm going on 19 years working for myself. And so I'm not sure what I thought that, oh, I'll just hire some people and it'll work out. But having not been managed very much in my life, as a professional, obviously I did work in trade publishing, and I was a reporter. So I did have that experience, but it wasn't for very long. I've definitely been unmanaged for a lot longer. So I found that that was actually harder for me to then go ahead and do that. And I wanted to focus myself on working in the business and working on the business more than managing people. And so now I've kind of like right sized my business a little bit more. I do have two people within the business. They're both part time. I have an editor that is about 50% time. I'm in a VA that is not yet 50% time, but close. And then I have a lot of freelancers and subcontractors that we use and we subcontract out to. And that so far has been like a wonderful model for me and has allowed me to scale up and down as the market goes up and down. And, we see right now what's going on in the economy. There's a lot of worry about what's going to be next year. I'm actually writing a lot of outlooks for my clients. And we work in the risk and insurance space. And so there's a lot of our clients who really do have kind of an eye on the economy. And a number of our clients are saying that things are going to be a little bit tighter, at least at the beginning of next year. And so that gives me confidence as a business owner that I'm not tied up with a ton of my money in personnel. And so I'm able to kind of scale up and down with freelancers at different times. So for me right now, this is the best business model. I do feel like there are other things I'm going to have to do to kind of get to that 1 million point. A lot of them I'm already thinking about and kind of planning for. But I do agree that the answer isn't always just to hire people.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of different things that we could dig into there. What are some of those kind of major things that you're thinking about? Like, are they big strategic changes that you need to make to get to seven figures?
So I definitely will have to bring, a little bit more headcount into the business. So I'm looking at hiring an operations person, but again, not full time, someone that would be more part time. And someone that would still be kind of a subcontractor, I guess format and structure. So I think that that could be good. I am also thinking about bringing on a totally different line of authority in my business. I do have someone that I'm connected to that is an expert in a different department and different area, not risk and insurance, and that could be a potential possibility for me in the next year as well. So those are just two kind of leverage areas that I'm considering.
Yeah. The other thing I'm interested. Okay, so um, there's the specific niche, and I want to talk about that at some point because I'm a big fan of specialization. But the other thing I was just wondering about, because one of the major services that you're providing is ghostwriting, copywriting, yeah?
Right. Correct. Yeah.
How is AI impacting on you and the way that you do things and your clients?
That's a great question. So I actually have a client who asked me to come speak about AA because they're not knowledgeable about it. I do find that my clients are less knowledgeable about using it than even I am. I'm out there actually trying to figure out synergies and ways to make my business more efficient by leveraging AI. I haven't been able to do it so much yet, although I do actually have a meeting tomorrow with a new AI writing business owner who is going to kind of demo for my team their tool to see if it works for us. I do have subscriptions to a number of different AI writing tools. So again, beyond ChatGPT, there are a number of AI tools that writers are using that are subscription-based models that are a lot more secure than ChatGPT. I haven't found any of them have helped so much just because the work that we do is so bespoke. So clients aren't asking us to do things that are easily searchable on the internet. They're more asking us to, which is really the model of using like right now large language processing like a ChatGPT. But most of our clients ask us to do things that are super bespoke. So I would say about 95% of the work we do is we meet on the phone with an expert in something very unique and specific, or a specific issue or topic that's coming up in the news, and we'll interview them on that, and then we will write the article with their name on it. So it's really unique and specific best practices, lessons learned, considerations for their clients on a specific topic. And most of that isn't stuff you can research right now. It's really kind of in their head. It's the risk management piece that goes with what our clients do. It's also just information. Even when we're writing about something that is a brand new law or something like that, those things aren't on the large language models at all either, right? So ChatGPT is only trained on 2020 and earlier. And so if you want to write about a new law that just came out in employee benefits, you're not going to be able to get that information on any kind of AI platform at all. So,
Yeah.
I'm trying to find efficiencies in my business and use it, but it hasn't worked yet.
Yeah, it's interesting, and a friend of mine challenged me to actually quantify how much I'm using it and how much it's helping me in terms of efficiency. What I found, and looking at in terms of, because I write a lot in terms of what I do, I think that I'm saving about 40 to 50% of my time, and so I'm
That's
getting
major.
I'm getting a major productivity boost. And yeah,
Oh,
so I'm finding it pretty significant in that sense.
and
So
what is it that you're using it for? I'd love to hear.
yeah, so I'm
Like,
using
can you
it
give us an
for,
example? Mm-hmm.
yeah, so a typical workflow for me, and this is where I think that having, like what you just talked about there, you talked about interviewing an expert.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where I think that these tools are incredible, is where you have experts in the driving seat, because the expert is able to give input into it, and it's not just somebody who doesn't know a lot about a topic asking questions and then not knowing if the output is correct or not. But if you can give expert input as well and then refine it as an expert who's knowledgeable about the field, what it means is that the output is actually quite high quality, because what it's really providing is it's just providing kind of like the grunt work of tidying up text. And so the workflow that I personally use is for myself and with my clients. So I interview some of my clients just like you do, it sounds like. Now I do these in the form of podcast interviews, but we then do a transcription of that, and then we pull the transcription in and we run that transcription through various different prompts to pull out different things. So like, for example, we can come up with a content strategy and a UVP, a unique value proposition, based on the interview that I did with the client, because I asked the right questions during that interview. So we can get the information out. So that's the way I use that. Then how I use it myself, for example, I was driving today and I was running Otter, which is a recording tool and
Yes.
transcription, and I narrated in a prompt in there with loads of information. I was narrating for 7 or 8 minutes while I was driving, and then I stopped the recording, took that transcription, put that into ChatGPT when I got back in the office, and then it was able to process based on what I had said. So that was the input from me, and so yeah, that's the way I use it, and I find that the dictation features are particularly what speed it up for me. So I'll use the dictation into the ChatGPT app as well, which is you can use it on your phone.
So
So that
you'll dictate something and then it will take that and go basically to town with that. Like it'll add to
y-
that, it'll
yeah,
create a blog based on like your 5 minutes of speaking or something like that.
exactly. So, for
Okay.
example, I was working on a new offer page for a new product,
Hmm.
for a new productized service, and so I was saying, here's what I would like it to have on there. So I want you to give that back to me in the form of a table with 3 columns with each of the three options. You know, the bronze, silver, gold options, and then come back to me with a sales page for that. Here's what I think should be on there, and use a Pain Dream Fix copywriting structure to the page, for example. That's one way that I would use it. So yeah, so I found that but again, I think that for me it's about having the expert knowledge to know, for example, what the copywriting structure that you could use is. That somebody who's using it at a more basic level, like who's not an expert in the field, they might ask it to create a sales page, but if they don't know what format to ask, then you need to do a bit of pre-work.
Yeah.
That's so.
And
But
then does it bother you that like all of your kind of like IP then that you've put into ChatGPT is now like out there for use?
yeah, I mean, it does and it doesn't. So I understand it's going to be out there, but either I make use of these tools now or I
Right.
don't. Like that's
That's true.
that's the
I
choice.
hear that.
And and I know that, like, what, so I guess, like, maybe that's something we should talk about, because I know that you talk about personal branding, and like,
Mhm.
I talk about building authority and personal brand. I think is really the same thing. I mean, they're effectively, I mean, maybe that's a good question. Is building authority the same as building a personal brand for you?
That's a good question. For me, it is because I'm kind of synonymous with my brand and the business, because the business is me, obviously. But I would say for my clients and my customers, in the risk and insurance space, we have been getting more and more and more requests to create like personal branding for business executives more than ever before. Right? It used to be the request was always like blogs that were kind of authored by the company, on a specific topic, some kind of new law that came out, how is this going to impact your customers and clients? And we'd write something that, again, maybe had a byline, but maybe didn't. Now, more often, we're getting a lot of requests from the marketing teams at like large commercial insurers or risk companies to actually, interview their C suite and then write the articles with their C-suite's names on them. And they will potentially go on the blog of the company, but even more so, they're going on a platform like LinkedIn. And then that person, that C-suite member, is actually publishing it as a newsletter on their own behalf. And again, it looks very good for the company, and it may also bring in ideals from the company as well. But it is definitely, businesses are now paying for their C-suite executives to create personal brands on social media. So
Yeah,
it's very interesting. It's new, or at
yeah,
least in the insurance space.
and I find this fascinating because, like, I think that we've seen what people have done in the world of influencers, and
Yeah,
this is effectively influencers for B2B, or
yeah,
for, and but we can't do entertainment in the same way. Like, we can't do just entertainment. There has to be an educational component there, and
hmm,
actually solving a client problem. At least that's the way I think about it in the content. But for
yeah,
me, the superpower of all of this is the interview component. That's the
right.
that's the bit that gets the information out of the thought leader's head and turns it
Hmm.
into that content. And it sounds like I'm really interested in the fact that that's a major part of what you do, because of the
Yeah,
overlap with what I do. So
yeah,
really
yeah.
interesting.
So I think the interview is a main piece of it, right? You have to be the kind of person, first of all, that the business leader trusts. That's
Hmm.
major. So in the beginning, when we first start an engagement like this, I definitely require speaking to that business leader a bunch, getting to know each other. And that's important, like to establish just a trust with the writer and the interviewer. And so number one is the interview piece, but then the other piece is that over time, when you are putting that leader's words onto like quote unquote paper or in print, obviously it's all digital, but actually, creating something with their language and their ideas, is that like a trust is built between the two of you. And then also when they give you comments in the first few times, you also are able to then learn their voice, learn how they want things to be, repeated and said, and learn how they translate certain things. And so then you come to a place where you do your job better because you know them better. So you're able to write in their voice more and more and more. And I find every executive we work for has a different voice. Some of them like to be more personal, some of them like to be more business, some of them, it's not just the subject matter that they're talking about, it's also their personality. And you have to be able to kind of infuse that into their content. And so that takes time, that takes trust, that takes actually doing it, often and getting feedback on both sides.
Yeah, and I think that also takes a human being, at least for right now, because that's something that the AI
Right.
bots are really not very good at right now, is kind of infusing that human element. And I see an awful lot of crap on LinkedIn in
Yes.
particular, you know, delve into the secrets of or unlock the
Right.
this and like the language that they use is so repetitive and
Hmm.
it so I
Yeah.
we've
No,
we've
that's
got to
true. To be
we've
like
got to
unique and
improve how
yeah.
we use these tools so that we're not doing that.
And I think the
um
tools will improve too themselves,
mhm.
right? Over time.
Yeah,
So
I assume that they will. The only issue with that is if people start using AI to produce more and more content, and then we train more our future AIs based on the content that's out there, we're going to get this reinforcement bias where,
same thing.
yeah, so it's going to be building crap on top of crap.
Right. Exactly. That's actually very funny.
So yeah, that's the only big issue. And then of course there's the reinforcement of biases and all of that kind of stuff as well that you have to be careful of.
Correct. That's an issue. Yes.
I'm interested in content strategy because we said we were going to talk about B2B content strategy. And can you tell me a little bit about what you actually think of content strategy or how you think about content strategy?
Sure. I think content strategy comes basically. I think the mistake that. How about I'll start with the mistake. I think the mistake that people make is that it's just about topics or ideas that you want to speak about and when you want to speak about them and creating a content calendar. And I think that's really just the starting point. I think a big piece in today's world, and again, this may change. I don't think this was the case even 5 or 10 years ago. I think today's world content strategy should primarily be about distribution. So, yes, you have to write the content, and yes, you have to come up with the ideas and the topics, and those are all important parts of fundamental parts of strategy. But then I think the main strategy and the way that businesses can actually gain superiority or authority over other businesses is by having a really good distribution strategy. So what I mean by that is, here's a piece of content. Now what are you going to do with it? Number one, where are you going to publish it? Number two, how are you going to repurpose it? And number three, how can you continue to use this piece? Is it evergreen? Is it specific to this time period? What are ways that you can distribute it to its full extent? And I think that that's where strategy is lacking in a lot of places. It's not actually hard to do this thought process. It's really not hard. People don't take the time to do it. So I find in-house marketing teams, those are my clients, they're strapped for time. And so they need somebody, a consultant like me or somebody else to kind of come in from the outside and say, here are the 10 things you can do with this piece that you just paid, someone to do, and you took time out of your executive's day. This is the best way to leverage it, and this is the best way to distribute it. So I think distribution is key to content strategy today, and I don't think people are doing it as effectively as they can.
I 100% agree with you. And so I'd like to dive into this topic even a
Sure.
bit more because I think it's so key. So you mentioned there, I just put it up on screen here, publish, repurpose, and looking at evergreen content in particular. And I think that this is one of the advantages that we have in the B2B space is that a lot of our content can be evergreen if we choose to focus on the evergreen content. And, we like choosing to go down the route of doing ephemeral news type content, I think that's a
Mhm.
bad idea because you can't reuse, repurpose any of that. But when you've created this evergreen content, you can repurpose it in so many different ways. Like, for example, what we're doing here, we're taking this live stream, we're putting it out on a bunch of different channels. We'll also take the video, put it on YouTube. We can
Mhm.
take it and cut it down into shorter video. We can also take the transcript and use turn that into blog posts and things like that. There's so many different ways that we could take this and repurpose it. So can you dig into this distribution a little bit more? So like distribution really is about getting your content in front of people,
Yeah,
right?
right, exactly. So, okay, I want to just go back real quick about the evergreen. I do think evergreen is amazing. I think it's probably the best content to create if you have a smaller budget. But I do think for businesses that aren't tight to budget, I would do a mix of evergreen and then also things that are very relevant to the moment. I do think that there's a range. It doesn't have to just be current content and then evergreen content. I think there's something in the middle too. I'll give you an example. I'm currently writing a lot of Outlook articles for my clients, based on their different industries and verticals in the construction and risk world. I mean, in the insurance and risk world. And what you can do with let's say an Outlook 2024 that you create, it's definitely not evergreen, right? Because you can't use it you can't use it in 2025, but you can use it for a very good part of this next year. So I think there's like a sliding scale almost on what's evergreen and what's not, and it's not just kind of like not evergreen or evergreen. I think there's a lot of like middle ground as well. But back to your question about digging kind of into the distribution, I think there's a lot of avenues and there's a lot of verticals that you can create a lot of different types of distribution. So number one in the B2B space obviously is LinkedIn. And some B2B brands are on multiple channels, not just LinkedIn. They're on Instagram, they're on Facebook, they're on other places. But I think the main thing about knowing where you want to distribute is, first of all, and this is probably something you say all the time, Alastair, but getting very, very clear on who your target market is. And once you know who your target market is and your audience that you're speaking to, the distribution channels seem to kind of come into play. So then you can know where you want to pitch articles to. Is LinkedIn the place you want to go to? Are there other social media channels? Are there certain B2B trade publications that you want to go to? Are there associations you want to reach out to? Are there podcasts you want to be on? There are so many different ways to what I call like quote unquote borrow an audience. So if you're very clear on who your audience is, you can go find other partners that have the same audience as you, and you can distribute in lots of different places.
So the part of knowing your audience, you talked about the insurance and risk industry. You have niche down or niche down,
Yeah.
and you've chosen a very tight specialization there.
Yes.
So one of the reasons why, and I know I totally believe I'm totally bought into this to the point that I have an evergreen podcast called the Specialization Podcast, which is solely about helping people to niche down and choose a specialization. If you so can you tell me a little bit just about how you came to the realization that you needed to niche down and how you actually chose that specialization?
Sure. So originally, this is a funny thing. I was actually in a different niche. So my job before I went off on my own was working as a trade publishing editor, and the magazines that I worked for, the two magazines I worked for, were for architects and engineers. So that was my first original, niche, and I did that for a bunch of years. I really did that. I did that for about 15 years exclusively. And slowly over time, my name would get out there and it was very word of mouth, and I would have different clients in different industries. And what happened was a client of mine, actually that was in healthcare, so not architecture engineering, but a client of mine that was in healthcare moved over to an insurance company. She brought me with her. And I thought, okay, I know insurance. I got this. I have an insurance card in my, pocket. I go to the doctor. I know how to do this. Meanwhile, the two of us realized very quickly that medical insurance is very different than commercial insurance. And we learned the industry. And then over time, I really came to love the risk and insurance industry because it reminds me of the days when I was a reporter. As a reporter, you're covering whatever's going on in business and in the government world, etc. And that's really what's going on in risk and insurance. We are a mirror to government and to business, and we are talking about what the new laws are that are happening, what's going on with, social unrest, with, anything that's going on in the world. That's what we're talking about in risk and insurance, because those are the risks that businesses are facing. And so about 4 years ago, literally right at the time of the pandemic, when so many people have these stories of, I quit my job or I did this, I did something also radical. I really put my stick in the sand and I said that I just, focus on risk insurance and compliance. And since then, the business has just exploded because there is a need, obviously, in every niche for people who understand that niche, understand the issues in that niche, understand the executives, understand the thought leaders there. And so the business has just really boomed since I really took that niche on. But I will say, a big reason why I did that was listening to podcasts like The Business of Authority, Jonathan Stark and Michelle Moulton, who we just talked about, listening to just what kind of experts in the field had to say. And a lot of people were saying to niche down. And I really loved that niche of risk and insurance. And so I just kind of did it. And it was another time where I kind of like, took a step out and said, okay, I hope this works. And thank God it did. And it's been, I don't know, almost 4 years that I've just niched on that. And again, I've been in the industry for like 10, but just had that as my specific niche. It's been about 4 years. So.
And did you feel fear about doing that, about taking that step?
Yeah, for sure. I think there's a lot of fear as being an entrepreneur, and that was just one of them. But I felt that same fear many other times in my life. Number one, when I went off on my own, I've been in business for myself for 19 years. And the first time when I decided to go off on my own, I left, I left the magazine that I was working for, and I went to my editor, and I went to his desk and I said, so Rob, I'm gonna, leave, and I'm gonna go do some freelance. And he was like, you can't do that. How can you just leave? And again, this was way before the gig economy. So, there weren't tons of freelancers out there. And I was like, well, watch me. And if you want to use me, here's my number, welcome to call. I'm happy to write for you guys. So I felt the same way then. I felt when I niched down, like you said, on risk and insurance and compliance. And all of these moves in business are risky. And as entrepreneurs, we have to be a little bit able to take a risk. And I think that the entrepreneurs that grow the most, and this is something that I've had to tell myself over and over again, and I see it often in the groups that I work with that are entrepreneurs. The more risks you take, the more your business has a chance to grow. And obviously we make so many mistakes, which I know we want to talk about as well here too, but we make mistakes all the time, but the more you can kind of put yourself out there and do the next right thing for you, even if that means really sticking your neck out and taking a big risk, your business will thank you, and usually you'll be in a better place that you want to be.
Yeah, cool. And thanks for talking about that. I think it's a really interesting one to talk about. And I talk to people about that specific fear. There's the fear of well, I'm turning away business, or I'm going to choose the wrong thing. I like the way, and I think it's Jonathan, but it might come from Philip Morgan originally. I'm not sure who it was, but they talk about picking a niche and a specialization as a test campaign. And just test it out and see if it works. And if it doesn't work, you can roll it back. There's nobody's going to handcuff you to that. So
that is true. But I will also say to that, and Blair Enns, who also does a lot of he does actually sales training for for different markets and creative professionals. I would say one of his things is he says it usually takes about 3 years to really gain authority in a niche, and I do think that's true. So I would say the last year has been much greater of a boom for me in my business. And again, like I said, I'm just coming up on 4 years of having kind of like stuck my stick in the sand of doing risk insurance compliance. And so I would say that that's true. So I would also encourage people who are trying out a niche, don't try it out for 5 days. Don't try it out for 6 months. Give it like a good run. And I feel the same way about social media, right? People will ask me like, how do you gain authority in LinkedIn? And I always say the same thing. Put some free information out there, give of yourself, and you'll see over time it will pay back. And people come back to me after, 3 months. It's not working. Of course it's not working, because it takes 6 to 9 months on LinkedIn. I think this is actually a stat that LinkedIn promotes and puts out there also. But it takes actually 6 to 9 months on a platform like LinkedIn to gain, adequate authority and to get your first client. So for me, I know it took 9 months to get my first client on LinkedIn. And again, that was after posting 2 to 3 times a week, every single week, consistently, out there giving out quote unquote free information, giving ideas, talking about, not advertising, but really being a helpful person and just kind of like adding to the conversation that was out there about content or about risk and insurance. It took 9 months. So I think people need to just remember that. And Rome was not built in a day. You will not build your niche in a day either. That's just how it's going to go.
Yeah, 100% agree with that. And I've been doing this, the Recognized Authority, for 144 episodes or so by the time this goes out. So
that's amazing.
Yeah, and so that's in and around the 3-year mark, I think. Just coming up to the 3-year mark. And now I was very lucky. I got some inbound inquiries pretty quick after I started, but I'm pretty sure that they came from referrals rather than from the actual process. But it does take time to build up that organic engine and flywheel. So yeah, it definitely takes time.
Yeah. And even that organic, you're saying like that organic engine that you create, that's also susceptible to referrals as well. So I'll get, referrals from people who see me on LinkedIn.
Mhm.
And often the people that come to me from LinkedIn have never liked a post of mine. They've never shared one. They've never commented. So I don't actually know that they're in my audience, but they are. So there's a
Yeah.
ton of lurkers out there that could become potential clients. You just don't know. I would even say some of my least quote unquote popular or performing posts, meaning they have fewer likes, they have fewer comments, they have fewer reposts, are some of the ones that people will mention to me that were like, very significant in their decision to reach out to me. So
This is a pattern that I've seen as well. I think I've heard this from other people, although I'm not sure that's the case. I've seen myself where some of my least popular in terms of downloads of or views of articles or podcast episodes, they're the ones where where clients will come from. And actually,
yeah.
I think I remember who talked to me about this before was Adam Shibley, who I had on the podcast about 80 episodes ago. I think he's
I don't know,
a guy.
Adam.
Yeah, he's a guy I used as a podcast coach when I was setting up. He was really helpful to me in
Awesome.
setting up the podcast back when I started out. And I remember talking to him about specifically interview podcasts versus solo episodes. And he said, look, your solo episodes will not get as many listens as the episodes with guests, but the solo episodes will bring you in clients. And that's why I do solo episodes every so often. Sometimes I'll do a solo episode every second episode. Typically, an interview episode is much easier to do because it's much easier to get on and ask questions. Solo episodes require more work, but I do understand the value of those, and that's why so I think that confirms what you're saying there.
Yeah, I absolutely actually listened to a solo episode of Rochelle's new soloist podcast today. And it was the first time that she had done something like that. And I thought it was excellent. And I know we'll for sure bring her clients because she gives away a lot of information in them. Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's the goal of any of the content that you're creating as a content creator yourself for your own business is to really give away as much as you can without actually selling your business on LinkedIn or on your podcast. But when you can just give away kind of details and little information. And I always say this is really the goal of all B2B content marketing. I tell my clients this too. The goal of whatever we're creating is so that the reader reads it and says, wow, if that's their free stuff, what's their paid stuff? Mm-hmm. That is always the goal of content creation.
Yeah. Sometimes, I think about when we talk about the brand here is the recognized authority for the podcast. And we talk about building authority and building personal brand. And that sometimes I think, that's very kind of inward focused, on what we want. But in reality, what we're doing, the content that we're creating when we're doing that, the authority building content is actually all for our clients, and it's all to help them with the problem that they're facing. And so actually, even though we're talking about building authority, what we're actually talking about doing is helping people and helping them with the problem that they're facing. So I think it's important to bear that in mind behind all of it,
Exactly. Yeah, that's the point.
Okay, one thing that we talked about a little bit in the pre-show is mistakes or failures, and I like to bring these up because I know that every business owner who's successful has a lot of them. I know there's famous Michael Jordan quotes about the number of failures and times he's missed the game-winning shots and things like that. Can you tell me a little bit about is there a business mistake or failure that you've experienced that you can tell us about?
Sure. Where should we start? Many. And I mentioned this before, definitely the failures I find kind of propel you ahead. And I had heard that from a lot of business owners. People say that, but as a business owner, you're like, oh no, how many mistakes do I have to make to get everything right? I'll say I've tried having different productized services that haven't worked. I currently have none. I have tried like I said before, scaling up, hiring 2 full-time people that were super costly. That didn't work out for me. I'm much happier now as a solo business owner, again, using subcontracted work. The list is really endless. I even tried to create I actually created a webinar that is LinkedIn training for insurance producers. So producer in insurance language is a salesperson. So I did that actually at a client of mine. It was super successful in person. I tried to do that on my own this year in Chicago, kind of rented out a hotel space and, thought like maybe I would just get a ton of different producers, coming from all different businesses. And even though I had people in the industry kind of like forwarding my information to producers, it was not super successful. But I do think that that I can take kind of I always try to do this. Obviously, every business owner will who's going to be successful moving forward. But you try to take those lessons and see other places that you can apply those products or services, because maybe it's just a little bit off your application or your distribution. And then it doesn't mean that the product or service is really not good. It just may mean you were kind of targeting it at the wrong audience. So let's say, for example, with my LinkedIn producers webinar. So I think it would be more successful, number one, maybe doing it online and, having it maybe cost less, but not be as in local and in person. And another thing that for sure was successful, and this is really how it was born, was bringing it to the larger companies for all of their producers and letting the businesses purchase that time from you. And they have already obviously a ton of producers that work for them, so you can do it that way instead of just kind of calling all producers. So there's a ton. I think there's a ton of different lessons learned, and some of them are about what actually works and what doesn't, and some of them are about what actually works and what doesn't for you, because each one of us is so different, and there's not one rule about the way that something will work positively or negatively for a business owner in general. Everybody just has got their own feeling about things and their own risk tolerance, right? Coming from the risk.
That's something I think about in terms of contradictory advice, because at this point, like I said, 140 plus episodes, I've had experts and very successful people on giving contradictory advice from somebody else who's equally successful, and I find that really interesting and absolutely fascinating, in fact, because we have people who have chosen completely different and opposite paths, and it's working for them. And I mean, the takeaway for me from that is that you have to try the trial and error thing. You have to do it, and particularly around content creation. I think you've got to try to create different types of content and see what works for you and what doesn't work for you. I think that's something that's really important. So
yeah. And one great example, I know you were gonna ask about like a book also. A really great book that teaches that lesson specifically is How I Built This by Guy Raz. I'm sure you've read that before. He has a podcast also, but it's just tremendous to read about these like quote unquote big brands that and love today, and to just see how their founders struggled, remortgaged their homes. I mean, even at like kind of the bottom of the barrel. And I found myself even during that book saying things to myself like, oh my gosh, I would have never done that. I would have never let it go that low. I would have quit, or I would have, many different things. And you see how people kind of like hold on, and then in the end, their business is successful. But often it took like a pivot that they weren't planning to do, or some kind of like different way of, either attacking the issue or problem or a different service or solution. And so I think the success is in the pivot very often. The more you can surround yourself, if you're an entrepreneur, with other people doing that. So like I mentioned, I'm in entrepreneur groups. I have mentors that I reach out to regularly. I am, like I do a lot of business development with other entrepreneurs. And I think that is what also keeps me sane and helps me to realize that I'm not the only one that has all these ups and downs, or, successes and then failures. Everybody is going through them all the time. And if we're all just kind of like scrappy and trying to learn together, it's a much better experience and feeling.
Yeah, I think that's why it's so important to have peers, like mastermind groups or groups of peers that you can talk to. And also coaches like Jonathan Stark is somebody else who I've worked with as a coach. Philip Morgan, I mentioned earlier. He was a coach for me and helped me with my specialization decision a lot. And Adam, who I talked to about the podcast, I've worked with countless coaches over the years on my business, which also helps me when I'm trying to coach my clients, because it makes it easier for me to understand where they're coming from. So I have one final question for you. Sure. What is the number one tip that you would give somebody who wants to build their authority?
That's a good question. I would say giving away your expertise. I know I talked about that briefly before, but you almost cannot give away too much. Obviously, I would not put everything down into a book and then give it away for free. You should definitely sell that. But if you give away little pieces at a time here and there, whether that's on LinkedIn, whether that's in a newsletter that you write, whether that's in a book that you create, etc., the more that you can almost give away, the more that people will recognize who you are and your value and what you do and what you bring to the table. And the other thing is, people are very nervous about that. I know you mentioned before, Alastair, that like, people don't want to give away, everything. They get nervous. And it's true. But I will tell you that the goal, as I said, with all B2B content, it's the same thing. If you can get people to say, wow, if this is the stuff that she's giving away for free, I wonder what it's like to work, in a paid engagement with her. And I also find that even the little points and things that you give away for free, no one is really sitting out there and like cataloging all of those things that you've given away for free and then somehow turning that into some strategy for themselves as a business. Nobody just has that much time. It just makes you an authority. And then somebody will come to you and say, hey, I know you mentioned this, this, and this, and these are things that attracted me, but how do you think that that applies to my business? Because everybody's going to want you to personalize your advice for them specifically. So that's why it works. And that's why you never are really giving away everything. And if you really are a thought leader and you really are an authority in your space, you will continue to have new ideas and you will continue to have new ways of working with people and you will continue to be a thought leader. And so the knowledge you have will only, get bigger. It won't be finite.
Yeah, and I just add something to that. The process of writing will give you more ideas. So as
Yes.
you start to try and share your knowledge, that
Yes.
will actually improve your knowledge. And
Mm-hmm.
you'll get better at your field because you write, because you're going to be connecting the pathways in your brain and coming up with new ideas and new insights. And one of the best ways to learn is to teach. So that's why
Yeah.
I think it's important to do some writing as well, or explaining what you're doing and teaching and sharing.
Yeah. And
Mindi,
mentorship plays into that too. You
yeah,
know?
this has been great. Thank you so much for coming on. Last thing I
Yeah,
just want to ask you is, where
sure.
can people find you if they want to learn more?
Sure. You can find me on LinkedIn. Absolutely. My website is zissmanmedia.com. We are Zissman Media. So those are the two best ways to reach me. DM me on LinkedIn. You can email me off the website. You can even jump on my calendar. I definitely do a lot of mentoring and coaching calls as well for fun. I enjoy doing that. I enjoy doing that with, students at my alma mater all the way to, other content professionals. So happy to be of service and to help anybody that, wants to reach out.
Awesome. Mindi, thank you so much for coming on the show.